Yes. I could even say personal experience that you can survive such events. But people hit a deer going at 80 miles an hour, and they can't maintain control of their vehicle. But the deer isn't pulverized; it's busted up. One chance in 100 the deer might live, but you got to break. All the stuff is pretty much in one place. You don't find a cell of skin here and a cell of skin there and a piece of a hoof over here. The thing's pretty much in one place, just busted up. Mm-hmm. There's survivors of skydiving accidents. The parachute doesn't open. There was also, a couple years after 9/11, a survivor of a window washer from the 47th floor in New York City. He was comatose for a while and busted up, but it was sometime December or end of November. I forget exact dates when, but I think the beginning of January he was discharged to rehab for physical therapy, and he walks again and talks again, and he's okay now.
Did he fall on the pavement?
Yeah, he was window washing, so he was on that platform. His brother was with him. Window washing, and he did not survive. But yeah, it was a straight drop down, but on the boards that they because the pulleys or whatever broke that hold him up. But they don't turn into a piece of finger here, or a piece of skin over there, and that's what we have around the World Trade Center. A hand over here. It's graphic. But the picture that really got me at first, it drew my attention. It just drew me to it. I didn't know why, so I don't force the data. It speaks when it's ready to. That's something important I'd like to say is if you listen to the data carefully enough, it will tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know, keep listening until you do. And I didn't know what this data said, but there was something in it that was trying to tell me something. And then I heard it one day, and it was this fellow that was outside of the 105th floor, hanging by a finger and a toe, or a hand and a foot, taking off his pants. I noticed several other ones a few windows over already had their pants off and their shirt off. And then you start wondering. Think of all the reasons someone would have to disrobe from the 105th floor, while dangling out of the 105th floor.
Is it because maybe they were hot?
Your first thought is that it's hot. Well, the clothes then would protect them against high heat. It's like a mitt that you use when you flip hamburgers.
Yes.
Protects your hand from cooking. And first thought I had is if I were there, I would make a beeline to the bathroom and get whatever extra clothes I have laying around, soaked down with water.
Yeah.
Wrap it around my head, then make a beeline for the door, and hope I can get out. Well, if the water's still running, you'd be wet from the wet wrap you'd have on yourself. If the sprinklers went off, you'd be wet from that. If the sprinklers didn't go off, you'd probably be hot and sweating, so you'd be wet from that. Any which way you look at it, it's a high likelihood that those people were wet. Okay, if it's smoky and that's why they're hanging outside the window, and for whatever peculiar reason they want to take their pants off, don't you just hold your breath, step in, take the pants off, then step back out? Why dangle over the street 105 stories below to take pants off? Because you can hold your breath long enough to get inside. It must be that inside there's something that affects the clothing.
Almost to make the water be almost like boiling while you have your clothes on?
Different types of energy fields we know will do that. You've heard about the active denial system?
Refresh my memory.
It's for crowd control, where they beam microwaves at a crowd it makes the people feel like they're burning up, so they back off.
They're using that in prisons now, I hear.
Yes. At first I wondered, okay, is that what they're doing to make people jump so they have victims? Or, I was kind of jumping around with ideas. But then, wait a minute. What if whatever it is part of the weapon, that there's an energy field within the building. And if you have this building kind of encased in this gridwork of steel columns all around the outside, maybe that serves to kind of hold it in. So, those thoughts start coming through your mind. But this one particular fellow I really connected to because it was like he was speaking to me, and he needed his story heard. And if I were in his position, I'd want my story heard. And so I feel like I'm fulfilling that promise I made to him.
Tell us more as to how you feel he was talking to you.
Well, it's the whole act of, obviously showing that he's taking his pants off while hanging outside of the 105th floor. It leaves you with a few choices, a few conclusions you can come to as to what would motivate him to do that. And you see up and down when I first saw this picture, I didn't recognize that a lot of these people were missing their shirt or pants. But then, when the light kicked on for me, it's like, yeah, why are so many of them without clothes? And there was one fellow that's pictured, coming down from the building, and he's about, 100 feet from the building, trailing a piece of clothing off of his foot, like he was not finished, taking his pants off.
So it was in a way, an involuntary reflex to some of these people to, when they're inside, they feel this heat permeating from their clothing because, as you say, probably the sprinklers were on and they...
Well, I don't have evidence of that, but those are all the possibilities I could think of. It seems like whatever the case is, it's high likelihood that people are wet, either from their own doing, from the sprinklers, or from their own sweat.
So almost like the boiling frog syndrome. Even if there's fire outside of the boiling pot, their subconscious reaction will be to jump out because they can't handle the heat. In this case, they were just jumping out.
Well, if your hand goes on a red hot burner on the stove, you don't sit and think about it. Your hand just flies off of it.
Exactly.
But it might not have even been that. It might have been something else. A force field or something. Who knows? But whatever the case is, there's something strange going on here.
My parapolitical mind almost goes into overdrive. It's almost as if they wanted all those people to jump for, I hate to say it, folks, but almost as a dramatic effect to show how many people were jumping. And these, quote-unquote, Muslim criminals were perpetrating this to the United States, almost to create the drama.
That could have been, but it also could have been a cover. For the next hour, we see pieces of the building coming down, pieces of human skin falling out of the sky, pieces of, everything was disintegrating in that volume of space and littering the ground. It wasn't like raining people, it was like snowing people. There was an accumulation on the ground. That's a little too graphic, so I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We need to talk about the evidence, and if the evidence is this graphic, we have to do it anyway. And that's why at the beginning of the show I say that this is a show for mature people. I'm sure that our listeners can take it. But when you have paper flying, but you can't see a toilet, a desk, or anything else, if this energy field caused the towers to pulverize, what effect does that have on human beings? Because some of these people were saying that they were just, it's almost as throwing, and bear with me here, folks, I don't mean to be this graphic, but it's almost as throwing a tomato on a wall. You probably have seen what happens when you throw a tomato on a wall. Is this what you mean when they were exploding?
I think some were exploding midair. But
in midair.
There was one guy who said something like, "I didn't need to see that. I only looked for a second, and I didn't need to see that."
Okay, how is that with conventional wisdom? It just for some reason it reminds me of the movie Scanners. Some of you may have seen the movie Scanners when the guy's head just blows up. How is that physically possible unless there's something triggering that explosion in midair? What can possibly cause this?
It has to be an energy field of some sort.
Right.
we don't need to say what kind of energy field, but something is not like it normally is in that volume of space.
Can this happen in midair and not obviously to the people who are watching on the ground?
You can have energy fields, very localized. After all, what is energy in the optical frequency? Light.
Right.
And, photographic film has very abrupt light and dark places. So you know that you can have, you can control the energy fields in very discrete boundaries.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this because it's so difficult to understand. And I borrow this quote from the late Arthur C. Clarke all the time, and I know you have included it on your book. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And this is exactly what I see here, almost magic, because the next chapter is called Magic Shows and the Power of Suggestion. If we don't know of a new technology and can't wrap our minds around it, we simply think it's magic. We simply try to make sense of what we're seeing and what we're being told. We thought we knew what we saw. What did we really see, Dr. Wood?
We have to see with our eyes, not with what we're told to see. And that sometimes is a challenge for people. Most people see what they expect to see. There's another good quote about that. Let's see if I can find it. About people, they see what they expect to see, what they want to see, what conventional wisdom tells them to see, what their experiences tell them to see. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, we're talking about the fact that most people see what they expect to see, what they want to see, what they've been told to see, what conventional wisdom tells them to see, not what is right before them in pristine condition. I think this is very well said. It's by Vincent Bugliosi. But it's expectations, and that is how magic shows work. They build your expectations so that you're seeing what they're directing you to see, not what they're doing with the left hand.
Right, exactly. And that seems to be the case that day.
And if people were outside of where they're supposed to be looking, they were ostracized until they're herded in with the crowd.
Well,
or they just shut up.
That's why from day one almost, we heard President Bush say you are either with us or you are with the terrorists. Yep. That was in everybody's mind. So if we heard anybody, and I've said this on the show a few times, this was years later, I think it was 2003, when one of my brothers sent me a PowerPoint presentation showing the Pentagon, that it was impossible for an airplane to have crashed at the Pentagon. And I basically did not talk to him for weeks. How dare you talk about our government being responsible for such a thing? Why in the world would they be lying? There's no reason for it. But then in silence, and I know this is what happened to a lot of you who are listening, in silence, because you didn't want to offend your families, you didn't want to sound like a lunatic, you didn't want to sound like a terrorist or a subversive person, you started looking until you started connecting the dots, and you started listening to other people. And you may have listened to Dr. Wood in the past. And this is where we are today, almost 10 years later. And the news that day had their own expert talk about how hot everything was, Dr. Wood. At the bottom of the towers was something called the bathtub. What is it, and what was its purpose?
That is where the key I found to pretty much the whole thing is, okay, once you think about the timing, it doesn't make sense. The thing couldn't have fallen that fast. Well, but if it fell, it would make a thud on the ground, right? So let's go look at the seismic signal. What? Not much of a seismic signal? It didn't fall. I used the Seattle Kingdome for comparison, and it made the same impact when it blew it up with controlled demolition that the towers made, but the towers were 30 times. That's 3 times 10 times the potential energy. So
the Kingdome was an empty shell.
Yeah, just a cylinder with